For centuries, libraries were basically islands, fortresses of books. If you wanted something, you had to physically go to the island that had it. But then, in the 20th century, this totally revolutionary idea started to pop up. An idea about connecting those islands, building bridges that would change, well, everything about how we get our hands on knowledge. So let's dive into this amazing story of how libraries went from these lonely buildings to this huge, powerful, interconnected web. So to really get why this revolution had to happen, you first got to understand the frankly impossible problem that pretty much every modern library was up against. And that was the challenge of trying to own everything. And here's the heart of the problem, right? On one hand, you've got this absolute explosion of information. I mean, they say more unique info has been created in just the last few years than in all of human history before that. It's insane. But then on the other hand, what's happening to library budgets? They're either shrinking or barely inching up. The math just doesn't work. There's no way, literally no way, any single institution on the planet can afford to buy it all. So for decades, the best they could come up with was something called the interlibrary loan. Basically, if your library didn't have a book you needed, they'd literally mail a request to another one that did. The problem? Oh, it was glacially slow. I mean, a researcher might have to wait a whole month just to get one single, crucial article. In the world we live in now, that's an eternity. But then, technology started to change everything. As telecommunications started shrinking the globe, a whole new idea started to take shape. It was finally time for a solution that wasn't built on postage stamps and snail mail, but on the speed of light. And that brings us to the hero of our story, the library network. Now, the key thing to get here isn't just the tech. It's those two words, formal arrangement. What that really means is that a bunch of libraries made a conscious choice to stop trying to do it all themselves, to stop competing and start cooperating. They decided to use technology to act like one giant virtual library for all their users. Okay, so how do you actually build one of these things? Well, it's actually a pretty logical three-step process. Step 1, you build the digital backbone, the network that connects all the libraries. Step 2, you take all their individual catalogs and you merge them into one huge, searchable thing called an online public access catalog, or OPAC. Just think of it like a single search engine that can see what's on the shelves of every single library in the network. And then, step 3, you use that system to share everything, seamlessly, like it was all in one big building. And this idea wasn't just some theory, It took off. It started happening all over the world. But one of the most powerful, most ambitious examples of this whole transformation actually comes from India, a country with this huge, diverse academic scene, which you can imagine was a massive challenge, but also an incredible opportunity. So when the telecom boom hit India in the mid-'80s, the effect on libraries was, wow, immediate and explosive. You can see on this timeline just a flurry of innovation, starting with networks just for single cities. But the real game changer, the date to remember, is 1988. That's when the nationwide InflipNet launched. And this was a massive project, aiming to connect the entire country's higher education system from one end to the other. So let's zoom in on InflipNet for a second, because it really shows you the sheer scale of this vision. This whole thing was started by the University Grants Commission, the UGC, which is basically the main group in charge of higher education in India. And their goal was huge, to systematically modernize the entire university library system in the country. And listen, this was about so much more than just plugging in some computers. The mission here was really deep. It was about creating a level playing field, making sure there were uniform standards so everyone could talk to each other digitally. It was about building a solid, reliable digital highway so that a student at a small regional university could get their hands on the exact same resources as a student at a big, fancy national university. Okay, so to see how this actually works in the real world, let's take a look at one of INFLBNet's biggest projects. It's a service that has become an absolute game changer for researchers, not just in India, but all over. It's called Shodhganga. So how big of a game changer are we talking about? Well, get this. At the time our source material was written, the Shodhganga Digital Library had over 8,500 PhD theses. That's 8,500 original, high-level research projects that used to be just locked away in some university archive somewhere. And now, they're available to literally anyone on the planet with an internet connection. So Shodhganga's whole mission is to collect, save digitally, and this is the most important part, provide open access to all that amazing PhD research coming out of India. I mean, this is a huge leap forward. Think about it. A paper that once just sat on a dusty shelf in one library is now a resource for the entire world. And this wasn't just InflipNet, by the way. This whole idea was contagious. You had DelNet, for example. It started as a network just for the city of Delhi, but then it blew up. It expanded its vision and became the developing library network, eventually connecting over 4,600 libraries all across India, and even some outside the country. The scale of this change it's just immense. But, of course, just as technology solves one problem, it usually creates a new one, right? Sharing physical books was getting easier and easier, but the world is moving on to something new: super expensive digital-only journals. And that meant library cooperation had to evolve again. Which brings us to the next big question. I mean, you can't exactly stick a subscription to an online database in the mail, especially when it costs tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So what do? How do libraries possibly handle the crushing cost of these must-have digital resources?
Well, they team up. They form something called a consortium. And here's the best way to think about it. If a library network is like a shared bookshelf, a library consortium is like a group buying club. It's like a bunch of friends pooling their money to buy a boat that none of them could ever afford on their own. By banding together like that, they get massive purchasing power. They can go to publishers and negotiate deals that would be totally impossible if they were just on their own.
And a perfect real-world example of this in action is INDEST. This is a consortium that was set up by the Indian government for a very specific reason: to give engineering and technology schools access to the world's absolute best digital resources. The way INDEST is structured is actually really clever. It's a tiered system. So at the very top, you have the core members. We're talking the big-name institutes like the IITs, and their access is paid for directly by the government. But here's the genius part. The other tiers. They allow government colleges and even private self-funded schools to join the club. It's this super flexible model that just opens up access for everyone and makes sure that even the smaller schools can get in on the incredible bargaining power of the whole group. Okay, so we've talked about networks, online catalogs, consortia, a lot of library talk. But let's take a step back for a second. Why should any of this matter to you if you're not a librarian or a professor? Because at the end of the day, this whole thing isn't really a story about library management. It's a story about democratizing knowledge. It's about a deliberate, worldwide effort to tear down the walls, the money walls, the geography walls, that have kept information locked away from the very people who need it most. And the impact? It's world-changing. Seriously. It means a scientist working in a tiny, remote lab can get their hands on the exact same cutting-edge research as a Nobel Prize winner at some fancy university. It means a student from a small town can use the same educational tools as a student from a huge city. What this really means is that we're moving towards a world where knowledge isn't just a privilege for the few, but a basic right for everyone. So these networks have completely changed the game for education and research. There's no doubt about it. And that just leaves us with one big question for the future. We live in an age of instant global connection, right? So what's next? How do we take this amazing idea and push it even further to make all the world's knowledge even more open, even easier to access, and even more powerful for every single person out there?